Bien. Bon, rebonjour.
Hello again. Well, what I'm going to talk about with you is that political science research have tackled the issue of trust, but especially the impact of decisions made, and especially the institutional adjustments that are made, and the trust based on the decision that is made, and more broadly in the political institutions, so the governors, those governing the country. So this is what I'm going to focus on, and based on empirical studies, so based on investigations that looked at this connection between institutional adjustments and trust. So this is something that's been around since the 1950s, when we had this major institutionalization. And what is key there are the efforts of David Easton, who tried to conceptualize in a more specific way, probably heard that yesterday, the notion of trust by referring to two rationales, the one of the abstract support and then the specific support. So this diffuse support logic starts from the idea that in the relationship between the trustors and trustees, there is some kind of reservoir of trust, an account of trust on the long term that makes them see the trustees in acting in a fair manner and for the general interest. So this diffuse support is built over the long term, and it's based on the decisions that are made, on the performances of the public authorities to improve the living conditions of citizens, but also on the way these decisions are made. So this diffuse trust, this goodwill account is essential for the survival of political parties and democracies. So first, for the citizens, this allows them to be more comfortable, and it does not require from those governed to be constantly monitoring specifically every action and decision made by the governments. So the trust account, this diffuse support or abstract support, is such that citizens can say, well, I expect, given the quality of institutions and those in the government, that they will make the best decisions, and I don't need to have the ability to monitor their actions closely or to have some expertise on those subjects myself. So somehow this allows the citizens to have a less active citizenship or citizen activity. So this abstract support reservoir, and that's where Easton insists, it allows citizens to accept the decisions for which that they kind of disagree. And that sends us back to an important notion, that is the loser consent, this idea that what matters in a democracy is to have some institutional provisions that make you accept the decision, even if you're in the minority. So accepting a decision you agree with does not require particular effort. People are not going to challenge a political regime that produces the decisions they agree with. But the notion of trust is important for those who don't get what they want, those who voted for a particular political party who is in the minority, and those who get decisions that they think that some fiscal decisions are too constraining, or decisions for health crisis, for example. So this trust, this diffuse support for the citizens has many benefits for them, but also for the governments, because this trust over the long term can make them expect some respect of these decisions and the implementation of these decisions without using coercion or fear. So it allows democracy to be maintained thanks to this trust. So we can see in these studies and this political research empirical indicator is key, and so this has led to empirical research that aims at measuring this trust somehow to get an indicator of the status of democracy. So we need a minimum of this abstract or diffuse support for the political party in office, a minimum of trust in the institutional provisions so that they make the right decisions. So this is going to lead many institutions, but also many researchers to try to monitor this trust over time. Here you have two examples. Here you have the social index of Wallonia done by the Statistic Wallonian Institute. And every 2 or 3 years, they produce an indicator of the status of Wallonia, and in which there is the indicator democracy and society. And so the details are not important, but you have 2003 up to 2023, and you see that between 2018 and 2023, there was a big collapse of the trust expressed by citizens, and in the institutions, you have this concern for the trust. And here you have a study that was done that took all the trust indicators and international studies between 58 and 2019, and you can see the trust in parliament, government, and political parties in different regions in the world to try to put some figures on the question of whether we are in a crisis of trust in democracies. So here you have a general trend that the trust is quite stable in sub-Saharan, is going down in sub-Saharan Africa, but for the rest, there are ups and downs. So researchers didn't just try to do that, but they tried to understand what were the sources of trust. What were the elements that generated some political trust stronger in constitutional arrangements. And here again, since we have a strong tradition of working on these issues, many studies have been done, so we can generate meta-studies, that is, studies that will compare the effects of different factors through hundreds of studies carried out in different countries. And you have the most recent meta-analysis done by 𝐸𝑁 that compared a number of indicators to try to see what generates the most trust. And what stand out here are two things. First thing, what generates the most trust is the performance of governments, and it is the satisfaction of citizens in the status of the economy in their country. So quite importantly, what generates the most trust is, do I consider the economy in my country is doing well? Do we have growth? And does it allow me to have a good standard of living? And you have other factors such as the poverty level in the country. Is it high or low? What else do we have? The fight against economic inequality. So there are a certain number of factors. And then there's a second group of factors, which is the institutional provisions. So the second important element is, do I consider that there are fair elections in my country? And then you have impartial elections or fair elections. Are you represented by the ideas of the political representatives? And so what the political science research highlighted is this duel between the performance of public policies and then the procedures that are put in place. So that's one aspect of what was done. Another one is to try to understand the consequences of trust, and especially as Easton assumed, when we have a higher level of political trust, does that generate a probable acceptance of political decisions, especially with the most constraining one they disagree with. So this was slightly tackled at the end of the pandemic. So that's what many studies did, Divine and here presented meta-analysis on all the studies on the way citizens accepted the measures to manage the pandemic, and they looked at the facts of this political trust, the effect on different factors. What we're interested in are the green and orange dots. In green, that's acceptance of limitations in traveling, going to work, and in orange, that's the acceptance of vaccines. So the higher the trust is in political parties and in politicians, in public health authorities, in government, in these three cases, the higher is the trust, the more positive is the effect or the acceptance on the measures of lockdowns and vaccines. So this is one example, but it shows that, in fact, Easton's intuition, generally speaking, is confirmed. In a trust relationship, the probability of accepting the decisions is good. And if there is distrust, of course, that's going to reduce your willingness to get vaccinated or to accept lockdowns. So these studies, for a very long time, did large comparative studies comparing different countries, different periods, and generating a lot of observations on different countries and regions. But the difficulty of those studies is that they cannot help us identify what is the respective place of the decision processes and how the decisions are made, and whether it is the content or the assessment of the content that matters. So here in the meta-analysis, yes, the economic satisfaction had a stronger effect, but at the same time, considering that it was in a fair political background, was quite high. So it was difficult to identify the top factor. And so for the past 10 years, there was a new approach that was developed, the experimental approach. This is based on what existed in economics and other fields, and they wanted to have a different respondents with different pieces of information on the decision mode or the content of the decision. And thanks to these experimental approaches, we try to better identify the weight of the different decision modes and the content of those decisions. So the underlying question was, when we see that we have less trust now, even if there's not a major decreasing pattern, but there's less trust, can we generate trust either by changing the content of public policies to have policies that would be more related to the preference of citizens, or can we improve things by changing the institutional provisions? And that's this issue of provisional constitutional provisions that was studied based on the observation that in the public debates on the democracy crisis, we've seen two different reactions from the governments. First, to say that we're going to generate trust by opening up the political systems, by increasing participation, and by generating citizen participation and making the decision process more inclusive, will get more trust. And others who said, no, the citizens don't want to be included. They want better performance. They want better expertise. What they don't agree with is to have public policies that don't perform well. So we need more expertise. And we've seen in the 90s and beginning of 2000 in the EU, some countries during a crisis thought, well, this solution is to have a government with technocrats. Italy is a good example. And same thing with Romania, Bulgaria. They said we have less trust, less bring in some expertise that will improve the content of public policies. So I'm going to show you three studies that were done on this. One was done by my team. So the first one is trying to compare. So is it the content of the decision, or is it the decision mode that is at stake? And 𝐸𝐻 did this study. So 𝐸𝐻 adopted this experimental procedure. He recruited a large number of respondents for an investigation. He divided them into smaller groups, and he's going to ask them to assess some political decisions, to assess first whether they consider this was an acceptable decision, or whether they trust the decision that was made as being a decision for the general interest of their society. So these citizens were spread into small groups, and they will receive different pieces of information. So these information can be different in terms of content. So there were different scenarios. There was the redistribution of money for NGOs, and others had decisions on the ban or not of smartphones in schools. And a third group had decisions on the ban of religious symbols in school. So we changed the topic, we changed the direction of the decisions. Some said, yes, we ban smartphones in school, and others had the authorization of smartphones in schools. And then the decision mode was studied. And in a small document presented to the respondent, they said this decision was made by the city council, so elected community, elected team. This decision was made by independent experts who were tasked by the public authorities to make a decision. And then this decision was made by a referendum in which citizens were included in that given town. So with this experimental approach, we can look at the different effects of, first, do I agree with the decision? So that was measured at the beginning of this protocol. And then, do I think that it's a fair constitutional provision? And the conclusion of 𝐸𝐻, there's just two colors. In light gray, you have the marginal effect in different groups of the content of the decision. Do I agree? And in black is what is your assessment of the decision process. So here you have the first 30 treatments of processing. There were many, but it was the same. The content of the decision is a lot more important in the assessment of the trust you have in the decision made than the way it was decided. So that confirms the assumption. For citizens, what matters is the content. So do I agree with what was decided? Now, the institutional arrangement or system doesn't matter much. So 𝐸𝐻 had worked on this already, and instead of comparing the content of decisions, we're going to compare the decision modes, and we're going to adopt this experimental procedure, and we'll try to see with the same content of decision whether we have some decision models or templates that generate more trust in the decisions that were made. So he compared 6 decision modes. So citizen assembly, so anyone, it was open, anyone could take part, no selection. All the people who walked in during the night when this was voted were there. Then citizen voting at the majority, so it's a consensus. And then random choice, and then there was a typical mode where you have the elected council voting, and then an expert committee. So what does this show? Well, the one generated trust, the less trust generated is when the elected representatives made that decision. So number 2, the referendum, the participatory and the consensus mode generated more trust. the least trust is the parliament and experts, and the most trust is the one involving citizens and especially referendum. So, based on this information with our team, we thought, well, it would be, this is interesting, but it's a bit artificial because in reality, we rarely have the total replacement of one system by another. What we can see as for the Convention Citoyenne is some mechanisms that see the addition of citizen participation. And even with a technocrat government, they don't get rid of the parliament. They're still an elected parliament, making decisions based on the proposals of a government of experts. So what is interesting is to try to see how this combination of institutional systems can generate more or less trust by controlling the content of the political decisions. So we have the three major models in the literature: technocrat government, elected parliament, and referendum. We did experiences in Italy because Italy has experience of these three modes. So they have referendum, they have an elected parliament, and at the time of the study, they had a government with technocrats. So it doesn't seem completely artificial. And if you had done the same thing in the UK or in Ireland, they've never had a government of technocrats, that would be less credible. So this is why this was done in Italy. And to assess two decisions on two different topics, first, an increase of succession taxes and the legalization of soft drugs, mild drugs. So here we are comparing those who do not agree with the decision, for example, those who don't want to see the tax increased on inheritance, and those who agree. So we're coming back to what Easton said. Here you can't say, but people are positive when they agree with the decision, whatever the system. If people are not very positive when they disagree with the increase of the tax on inheritance, it doesn't matter what is the institutional system. But what we were interested in is those who disagree. So the institutional system can then generate more trust. And what we have seen, many analyses have been done. So I'm going to show you the first interesting thing is that the parliament decision followed by a referendum, for those who disagree as for those who agree, can generate more trust and more satisfaction in this decision and more willingness to accept to pay this tax. So the intervention with a direct intervention of the citizens works after a vote at the parliament, and it's a lot stronger than when there's no intervention of the parliament. If you have a citizen initiative, then that would be voted on by referendum, no intervention of the parliament, the effect is less strong. So first scenario that works well to generate significant trust, the parliament has a debate, makes a proposal, submits it to a referendum, and it works for those who disagree as well as those who agree. The other way that works well is when you have a parliament voting a law after recommendation of a committee of experts. So the committee of experts comes first, and then you have a decision of the parliament. Then again, this mechanism can generate more satisfaction, more acceptance, and more trust than when you have a situation when the parliament decides alone, or when you have the three mechanism. That was another assumption. Do people want everything? No. The scenario when you have experts, parliament, and referendum is not the favorite scenario. The favorite one is two steps: parliament following a referendum, or parliament with before recommendations of experts. So what does that tell us? What can we draw from this? Political trust is key. It is key for the survival of democratic regimes to accept decisions, but the less optimistic part of my conclusion is that, in fact, those who are interested in constitutional systems, those who think that by changing those systems we can build trust, specifically on some decisions, but also over the long term, it's not really something we see. So what is confirmed here is that first what matters is the content of the decisions, and the content of the decision is the most important thing. So the loss of trust now, it might be due to constitutional systems, but especially due to the discontent of the citizens in the support they receive or the services they receive. So some studies were done before World War II, but just following the World War II, there was economic growth, but also the extension of the welfare state. That's where the trust was the highest, and that's no surprise. And what matters is the satisfaction, but especially the congruence. Do I think that the performances are good, and are the decisions made in agreement with what I like, what I expect? If we look at institutions, representative institutions don't generate the most trust, and according to Essayson, they generate less trust. But there is some hope to have a combination of the parliament with some experts before the vote in parliament. So the expert committees making recommendations when technocrat governments are in power, and then the intervention or participation of citizens. The effects of referendums are a lot higher than the citizens committee taking place. So when there's a debate of the parliament based on expert recommendations, generate more trust with those who disagree with the decisions and those who agree with the decisions. This is what I wanted to tell you by using all the different studies in political sciences on this topic. Thank you very much.